In this episode, we'll discuss how project management can be a game changer in clinical research. We'll talk to Jessica Thompson, founder of the Association of Clinical Research Project Managers, ACRPM. We're going to discuss the following questions. What tools are required in clinical research project management? What is the significance of the critical path in clinical research project management? Is the project manager different from the manager? How can the iron triangle be used to optimize clinical research? Stay tuned, let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of DarshanTalks. I'm here with Jessica Thompson, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about ACRPM, how that fits into the legal regulatory compliance landscape, and we'll just find out a little bit more about her as well. So Jess, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure, why not? Hi everyone, my name is Jess Thompson. I have been in the clinical research industry for about 15 years. I started in a lab, actually processing rectal swabs, and then moved on up to a coordinator, then to regulatory, then more into a project manager role at the site level, then academic research organization roles and CRO roles, and then most recently sponsor roles. Throughout all of that, I kind of saw a lot of the same trends happening of, not knowing how to manage timelines, how to manage vendors, all of those kind of things. So that kind of led me to establishing the Association of Clinical Research Project Managers to really just train on project management and some of those very easy techniques and topics that we just don't know in clinical research. We're trained in clinical research in the science, but we're not trained on how to actually manage the project. So that's really where my passion lies. But thanks so much for having me today.
Absolutely, and thank you for coming on. Now, you make this mention that we are trained in clinical research, but not in project management. Are the tools different for project management and clinical research versus, say, something else altogether?
I would say in project management, they're very similar. The unique thing about clinical research project management is that in most industries, project management is kind of the same across the board. You can pick up the same project in a construction project or, other projects like that. But then in clinical research, you really have to have that strong background. You can't just manage it like a typical project because we do have all the regulatory issues. We have human subjects we're dealing with. So it is much more complex, and our projects are crazy, right? We have a phase 3 project that has 40,000 patients. That is over 40,000 projects that we're all managing. And it's, in our industry, I feel like there's this unique thought of what project managers are, when in reality, we're all project managers. We're all managing portions of that project, even from regulatory contracts, all of that. Everybody is managing a portion of the project and really utilizing project management skills without even knowing it.
So talk to me about, from a regulatory, clinical, compliance, legal perspective, what are some of the tools you have to bring to manage these projects properly?
Vendor management. I feel like that is the biggest thing. Also scope management. Those are two really big things, because if you think about all of our stakeholders, right? We have so many stinking stakeholders, it's insane. And they're all competing against each other, right? Even just on a clinical research team, you have your biostats team that want all of these different endpoints. You have your clinical team who's like, whoa, that's way too many endpoints. Our patients can't do that. And then we have regulatory who, after we come up with all these ideas, we have the regulatory team that's like, no, you can't do any of that. And so it's a lot of stakeholder management, vendor management of, okay, what are we able to do? What is within scope and timelines? I feel like even if we could just train our people on how to figure out the critical path, we'd save so much time, money, energy, sanity, all these little things that become such big things within the clinical research world that if we just took the time to do a little bit of training, I really feel like we could save not only money, but sanity as well.
Now, you use this term I've heard before. I'm not a project manager, but I've heard some of these terms in some of the projects I've done. Critical path. What does that actually mean?
So the critical path is the path that takes the longest. So a lot of times that's regulatory, right? So we rely upon FDA, we rely upon IRB, we rely upon all these different things that they are really our points that is the fastest we can actually move. And then if you talk to a business development person that doesn't really understand all these different
Intricacies.
intricate. Thank you. I don't know why that was not coming out of my mouth. They don't understand that you really need all this time. They can say that we can speed this up. I was on a project with phase 1 cancer studies or cancer clinics, and they wanted us to activate these sites in 2 months. And I was like, y'all really just don't understand how this works, do you? Like, that was really like my final point of, okay, we've got to do something here. We have to talk about what a critical path is. And it's really that, okay, no matter how hard we try to push this, the FDA still has that 30-day window, and they can come back and they can really change our timelines completely because there might be new things that we have to add in, things we have to take out. Even, databases, right? They have specific time points of how fast they can actually move and how fast we can get this done. Even if you think about the schedule of events, that is a critical path. We can only move at a specific time point. So just looking at that and saying, okay, what is the fastest we can move? What can we do at the same time? But what are the dependencies as well? Because I can't move forward and start enrolling patients until I have FDA approval, until I have IRB approval, until I have contracts in place. So it's really just looking at the whole picture and saying, okay, how much time is required for each of these activities? What is the dependency for these activities to occur? And how fast can I actually move? But if something goes wrong, what is that going to affect? And so that's essentially the critical path.
And thank you for that really succinct explanation. I'd never realized critical path meant the longest time. To me, I would have actually internally thought it's the shortest time because it's the absolute minimum that must be achieved. But you're saying it's the stuff that needs to be achieved to get to your final goal. Now, when you are helping companies determine their critical path, I imagine that takes some time. That adds to the critical path. How do companies respond to saying, I'm going to help you organize because it's going to help you in the future, but right now it may actually end up taking up more time?
Oh my goodness, this is one thing I preach all the time. I feel like in our industry, we fail to plan. We don't take time for planning. And it's literally just building the ship as you're flying it. So I call it flying by the seat of your pants project management, where, you're just kind of putting out fires as it goes, but failure to plan is planning to fail, and not taking that time up front to say, okay, what all do I need? What stakeholders do I need in the room? We see it all the time with protocols, all the stinking protocol amendments. If you got everybody in a room together, all the stakeholders that said, okay, these are our concerns with the protocol, these are our concerns with the timeline, it would actually help our timelines because we would address those issues up front and talk about the risks up front and what those risks mean. And that's another part of project management is risk identification, risk mitigation, risk management that we don't really do in project management and clinical research because we're not trained on how to. So if we're looking at, say, okay, what happens if enrollment doesn't work, right? We see that as a risk, but we don't really talk about it until it occurs. And so a lot of times, what do we do to mitigate that risk? What is that a risk we're going to accept, or are we going to transfer that risk? So if we transfer that risk, that might be hiring an outside recruitment agency. So we're doing a lot of the project management things, but without putting a name to it. But if we put a name to it and put a process in place with it, it's just going to help us in the long run to really have an idea of what we're doing and not, again, flying by the seat of our pants project management.
I love what you're saying because if I had a vision into, I'm thinking as a lawyer who negotiates a lot of these agreements, right? And my experience is that if I would have had some knowledge that there is a risk on recruitment, I might negotiate that. If I'm a sponsor, I might talk to the site and say, I'm not giving it to you because I don't think you can handle it. I'm going to have someone else do it. If I'm a site, I might say, I'm not taking on this risk, or and negotiate that as part of the contract itself. Instead, what you get are unhappy sites, you get unhappy sponsors because neither of their needs are being met. Sites are saying, I wish I had a bigger budget. Sponsors are saying, I don't care if you had a bigger budget, you just don't have the patients around you. It's on me to get you those patients. And that communication doesn't happen. And what you're saying is project management would give you visibility into problems that you don't necessarily know about right now if you just sit down and organize. Talk to me a little bit further, and I don't know if you had this conversation with others before, but how is ACRP connected to ACRPM?
It is not. And I hate that we had to like take that, but it was like there's only so many letters that work with clinical research project managers. So it was either put an A at the beginning or an S at the end. And CRPMS just sounded weird. Because and so ACRP, for those who don't know, is the Association of Clinical Research Professionals. We are ACRPM, which is the Association of Clinical Research Project Managers. Again, I hate that it is very similar to that, but I am working with ACRP on some project management training and everything as well. So it's been really nice. I'm so glad that they were so welcoming of me coming into their space. So, and like you said, if you had an idea of what the risks were, if you had an idea of what those timelines look like, if you had an idea of what all these different parts may be within a clinical project that we're not aware of at the beginning, it makes us all better project managers. For instance, I did the math on it. And so a phase 3 project, very high level with, like I said, 40,000 patients, 3 countries, 200, not even 200 sites. I think it was like 180 sites, if that. There are like 1,500 project managers within that project. The way that we're looking at project management right now, though, is that it's only that sponsor level that you're really having that project manager. That's not the case. You have project managers at the sponsor level as project managers, at the CRO level as project managers, or country trials managers, clinical trial managers, CRAs, because they're managing the sites at a project level, clinical research coordinators because they are managing the projects at their own sites. PIs are project managers because they're managing the projects. And so if you look at it, it really encompasses the entirety of clinical research professionals, because even if we just took some of the little knowledge pieces and the nuggets that would really help for their specific role, it would make them more effective and efficient in their role, while again saving their sanity because they're not just reinventing the wheel every time.
I love that. So let's start with the absolute basics of this question, right? If you are a large sponsor and going, I should probably have project managers involved in this process, who I assume they come to you and they say, we need to be ready for this. Talk to me about the way you walk them through this. Talk to me about how people get trained, and where does that go from there?
Sure. So again, this is really the way that we function in clinical research is different than any other industry, because typically in an industry or most other industries, a project manager is brought in at the thought or the concept. So prior to project planning, but like in the initiation phase. So they're actually walking hand in hand with the people that are coming up with this, like, so the medical writers or the stakeholders, and talking them through from the beginning and saying, okay, this is what this is doable, this is not doable based on what we have here. And then also looking at the timelines. And so that's where I really think that we have room to improve in the clinical research industry, is bringing in project managers earlier, because right now in the industry, essentially project managers are handed a study and said, these are your timelines, these are your dependencies, these are everything that you need to do, and then you have to work with it. That's not typically how this works. Typically in project management, the project manager is able to assist with the timelines, able to identify risks, able to then talk through, okay, these are all the project plans that we need to have in place. So that way, once you're implementing and you're monitoring and controlling the project, you're not like, oh crap, we don't have that plan in place. The project manager would have been there from the beginning to say, no, here are all the plans that we need in place to make this effective and efficient and for the project to succeed. So currently, we are not bringing project managers in at the right time, but also we don't have our project managers trained adequately to even be able to talk about it intelligently at the beginning. Because the way that we work currently in clinical research, a lot of us moved up from coordinators to CRAs to then project managers or clinical trial managers. And with that, you gain the knowledge of clinical research, but you don't gain the knowledge of how to actually run those studies. And that's different at each of the different levels. So what you learn at a coordinator level, you're learning how to manage that project at the site level. Then the CRA, you're learning it at the site or at the higher level of multiple sites. And then from there on, but with that, you're learning more clinical research, but nobody's like, oh, hey, these are the new templates and tools and plans that you need in place. This is how to write a monitoring plan. This is how to build a timeline. So I think there's a lot of different things encompassed in that question that in the ideal world or the PMI, Project Management International world, it would tell us to do something totally different than what we're doing right now. But my goal is really just to start training some of the project managers to be like, okay, hey, your life doesn't have to be this hard. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss the issues that we're having. So that way we can just slowly make it easier and, just learn along the way instead of it just being thrown to the sharks, which is kind of what we do in clinical research these days.
What I find fascinating is what you're describing. And again, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So as a lawyer, I come at this and I kind of go, if you would have called me in 2 months ago, we could have prevented a lot of headache. It's not just going to be more expensive for you to do what you're doing because, well, here we are. And the timelines change and your attention needs to refocus. The question I have for you is it fair to say that the role of the project manager in clinical research right now is more crisis manager than project manager? Because you're being pulled in at the last minute. There's now a crisis. We need to organize so that we can get that crisis into control, not the project itself. And if so, are the skill sets associated with being a crisis manager different from those being a project manager?
100%. You hit the nail on the head. And it's interesting you say it. So what I say all the time too is that, we all have to be reactive in clinical research, not proactive. And project management should be proactive. It should be identifying the risks and all of these things ahead of time. So just like a lawyer, you can say, don't say that. We can say, don't do that. Right. This is going to be a mess. And I love the way that you put that because yes, exactly. If you would have brought a project manager in earlier, if you would have brought a lawyer in earlier, there's so many things that would have been cheaper and easier to dig yourself out of a hole in rather than like having to put out the fire or having to run around and be reactive. So yes, absolutely, because then it actually makes the project manager's role a whole lot harder because you're having to be like a chaos coordinator and you're having to be a change manager at the same time, where if you would have established these issues, or not the issues, if you had established these plans, these processes ahead of time, you wouldn't be having to change everybody in the process as well. So we all know people hate change. If you're bringing in a project manager after everybody has their head set on something, they're married to this idea. If a project manager says, there's no way this timeline's going to work, how do you think people are they're not going to listen to the project manager, no matter how much data is there. They've already been spending months on this protocol and saying, oh no, this is going to work, where it would have been easier for them to swallow, 2-3 months ahead of time. But the same can be said about sites, right? Where we have to do protocol amendments. That is a whole lot harder for people it's more costly. Everybody is really frustrated at that point, where if we would have just talked about it from the beginning, we could have avoided all that headache. We could have avoided all that cost. So I think that it's going to be almost a shift in that mindset of having to be like, okay, where are we with project management? Do we need to bring them in sooner? Do we need to just train our project managers on how to handle change, how to handle crisis? Or are we going to utilize project managers in the way that they're meant to be utilized, where it's proactive rather than reactive, and we're just setting our projects up to succeed from the beginning?
So I love how simple you make it all sound. It's in my head, I'm just going, this is so much more difficult than Jess is making it out to be, because you're just trying to make it bite-sized for the rest of us to understand. So I appreciate that. Really basic question that I just realized I've never asked before. Is a project manager different from a manager? I mean, I think of a manager as someone who by definition manages people and projects, and people are part of the project. So is there a difference?
There is. So there's a difference between like a functional manager and a project manager. So a lot of us operate in matrix organizations, which are essentially, they report to the project manager for the project, but they have a functional manager that handles really like the day-to-day PTO, that kind of thing. In a matrix organization, which is what most of us operate in, they have their functional manager that they go to for, training, very standardized training, like GCP training, those kind of things. But then they come to the project manager and say, okay, I need project related training. So that's where the difference is are, but the project manager and the functional manager have to work together. So even though they're separate entities, we do rely upon each other for different things. So the project manager, of course, has to communicate with the functional manager to say, okay, these are the competencies that your team is not showing. But the project manager should not be in charge of training on those standard competencies. That is the functional manager role. There are situations in smaller, especially biotechs, where the functional manager may be the project manager as well, which is not a bad thing. And I think in some situations, it's actually a good thing because you're not having to communicate back and forth. You're not having to worry about different personalities, those kind of things. But in these larger projects, we really are dealing with matrix organizations where there's a functional manager and there's a project manager. And in a lot of cases, there's a lot more than that too, right? Like you have a project director, you have a country director, you have all these different things. So, but making it as simple as we can, functional manager really does like the yearly reviews, the PTO, a lot of times expense reports. The project manager is only focused on the project and the deliverables for that project.
Very cool. Now, one of the things I've heard a lot about is the idea of like Kaizen and Six Sigma. How do they fit into this?
But okay, this is one of my soapboxes. Okay, everybody talks about going lean. Lean does not mean fewer people. Lean means simpler processes, and it drives me up the wall whenever I feel like a lot of these layoffs and everything, people have been using lean as an example or saying we're going lean. And I'm like, no, you're not going lean. You're cutting your workforce to try to save money, but there's still all these crazy processes. So I think that in project management and in clinical research in particular, it is hard to go at least like Kaizen, like Six Sigma. It's hard to go that far because we're dealing with human subjects. Of course, we want to put quality at the highest point.
Could you explain what they are before you say that that's how far we want to go? But yeah.
Sure. So Six Sigma is essentially saying that there's one issue, one deficit in quality in a million. So it's like 0.00001% chance that there's going to be a quality issue. We're dealing with human subjects. There's no way that that's going to happen. Lean is essentially making it so lean is decreasing the procedures and the processes in order to make it more streamlined, which is what a lot of us tried to do with COVID, with FDA or contracts or all these different kind of things, really just making it more streamlined. But I think that those are actually techniques that I am shying away from because I don't want to scare people away from project management because it can be so much simpler. Even if we teach people like very simple things like the iron triangle, which I'm happy to explain as well. Those are the things that I would like to focus on because those are the things that really matter right now instead of having to get into the technical things. So like the biggest thing that I always tell people is the iron triangle. I'm gonna use my hands. So the iron triangle says you can have three things. It's going to be like time, cost, and quality, but it's a triangle. So one thing has to give, right? You can't have all of that and maintain scope. Scope is the middle of the triangle. So you can have it fast, you can have it cheap, but quality is not going to be there. You can have it high quality and you can have it fast, but it's going to be expensive. Last one would be you want it high quality and cheap, but it's not going to be fast.
I think is it fair to say that in our industry we say we want all three, but realistically we land up with fast and cheap and unfortunately land up compromising quality.
That's exactly it. And that is the biggest issue here is that if we're trying to keep pushing and pushing and pushing for it to be fast, and that's what a lot of the major biotechs or like pharma companies are doing right now, they want it to be fast and like the faster. But that means, and keeping the same cost or actually decreasing cost. What does that mean to quality? That means that everybody's overworked. That means that, you have, yes, you're speeding all these things up, but we're putting human lives at risk here. This isn't just like, I don't even want to say a construction project because that could still be a risk, but this isn't just a small project. This is a major project dealing with human lives. And so that iron triangle is so simple, but is so important to describe to stakeholders and executives and C-suites.
I'm gonna take just like a lawyer. I'm gonna take the other side of that equation. The iron triangle ignores a very important concept, which is lack of waste and lack of efficiency. The idea being that you can be cheaper, faster, and more efficient if you had actually removed waste from your system. Now, that is a process that can be expensive, but that's a process on your side, not a process on my side. And therefore, I expect you to have figured that piece out. I'm not paying for that. How do you respond to sponsors like that? Because to me, it reminds, and I'll sort of speak to it. I work with sites, I work with sponsors, so this is not a sponsor dig. I'm just using that as an example because they have the bully pulpit often. Donald Rumsfeld said, you go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. In the same way, you go to a clinical trial with the sites that you have, not the sites that you've made up in your head that you want. They are what they are with the processes that they have. Can they be more efficient? I'm sure they can. Can they have less waste? I'm sure they can. But the truth is that in the end, these are the people you're working with. So even though you think it could be cheaper, they aren't right now. If you want them to be more efficient, that's on you at that point. But that's an uninformed view. Talk to me about your thought process.
I mean, I think that it's so clunky, right? Like FDA is very clunky, IRB is very clunky, sponsors. Oh my goodness, how many internal reviews do we need before somebody will approve a consent form before it even goes to the IRB? So those are the things that I'm like, okay, you want this faster, but then I have to send it to 12 people to get it approved. How? That's not on me. That's on your processes. And so that's kind of one of the things with lean where they say we're going lean. And I'm like, are you though? Because you're cutting the workforce, but the procedures and the process and the job is still just as clunky as it was. So no, you're not going lean. You're actually making more work for the people that are left. And so that's always my argument of like, okay, why can't you do this faster? I'm like, okay, well, in order for this to go through, say, an academic medical center, okay, for our contract, we're going to go back and forth 20 times to get what you want. And say as a CRO, our CRO can't always negotiate exactly what the sponsor wants. So then we have to not only go back to the CRO, it has to go back to the sponsor review, and then it has to go to somebody else, and then it has to go to the project director for review, and then we send it back to the site, and then it does the same process at the site. So a lot of that is exactly that, where I'm like, okay, tell me where I could cut it, because I will. But if you want me to send my document at a CRO, I think is a perfect example of this, like, because a lot of times sponsors want CROs to work faster. But then the processes that the sponsors require of the CROs, where they're not taking complete ownership of the study, they still have to go to the sponsor for everything. There's just no way around that. Where, okay, yes, I could get it done in 3 days, but all the review processes and everybody needs 48 hours for a review. And then if I'm having 5 people review it, that's 10 days for one minor change.
This speaks to the idea of process mapping. It speaks to the idea of knowing exactly what steps people have to take in most situations. Again, that itself takes time, energy, effort. How can people learn more? And what would, if once they come to you, what would you train them to do? And what is the advantage of being part of ACRPM?
Sure. So ACRPM.org, we have a ton of articles and they're really high level. So we really talk about different things between professional development, project management, clinical research, project management, but also health and well-being, because we are in an industry that is asking a lot of us. And a lot of times what we do not take care of is ourselves. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of others. So that's a big part of ACRPM for me, is really maintaining the well-being of our project managers as well, and seeing them as a whole person rather than a productivity engine. So a lot of that it's shown throughout everything that we do at ACRPM. So like we have a health and wellness retreat, but it's also, it also is for learning about project management, but taking care of yourself in the process too. So a lot of times I get people to start with the very basics of project management 101. We get everybody on the same playing field. We'll do this as a webinar. I have it recorded as well. It's not on the website yet, but just because it's a one-man show right now. So just kind of spread thin. But Project Management 101 gets everybody on the same playing field. Then we go from there, Project Management 201. We are working with PMI, Project Management Institute, to become authorized training partners for the Project Management Professional certification. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. It really is determining on, are you just wanting project management skills to be better at your job currently, or is this a profession that you want to explore further? And do you want to just have like the very high level nitty gritty tools and templates? Okay, perfect. I'm gonna send you this way. If you want to get really in depth, I'll send you a different way. So it's really personalized, just based on what everybody is looking for. But the best place to start, I would say, is ACRPM.org, because that really, we have articles that describe like very easily what's a deliverable, what is scope, what are these different things, and then just reaching out to me. I'm happy to have conversations, and if your team wants any kind of training, I'm happy to do that as well. We have monthly webinars. There's tons of education opportunities, so that's really a major part of ACRPM and why we're doing it right now.
Awesome. Jessica, this was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on.